As promised, folks, a bit of bonus content here. I'm joined with the magnificent Oli Kay and, of course, my co-host here, Zach Lowy on the Global Football Show. We've brought Oli on to talk about this fascinating title race in England, specifically Mikel Arteta and the emergence of Mikel Arteta, which I don't think anyone saw coming. First of all, Oli, how you doing, mate?
Very good, thanks. You?
All good, all good. Lovely to have you on the pod again.
Back on again?
Yes, it's been a while, my friend. I must confess, at the start of the season, if you'd asked me, would Arsenal be sitting top of the league with Mikel Arteta, I would have said a hard no. How has this happened?
Well, they've built something over the course of, I was going to say over 3 years since his appointment, but particularly the last 18 months, it's a project that's really kind of come together. I think the first year or so, I think the club was almost sort of treading water. I think there was as much emphasis on getting players out than getting players in. But I think Arteta has these are buzzwords in a way, but he's improved the culture around the team, the environment around the team, the spirit. Everything has completely changed in terms of the mentality, belief of the team. Also, the sort of playing philosophy, the playing style. They now look, and it's taken a long time really, but they now look like a team that's really fantastically well coached. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing. And, if you go back to, I guess, sort of about 12 months into his time, they had a really bad run up to Christmas, Christmas 2020. It really looked like, it had already run its course under Arteta. The board stuck with him, I think, more in hope than expectation. But he has proved himself to be a really excellent coach, excellent manager, and excellent leader. Some really big, tough decisions he's made. Really tough start to last season, and again battled through it. Missed out on top four last season narrowly. That was a real blow. There were a lot of people who were frustrated with him. Again, the club stuck with it. He stuck with it, and the players stuck with him. And I think it's just, I think there's a danger that people will look at it and say, well, look, they gave him time. It shows if you just give someone time, it will always work. Like they still say about Ferguson, 30 years on, everyone says, if you just give someone time, not everyone merits time. Arteta has merited time and shown that he has the strength as a coach, as a manager, and as a leader to produce something which I think is unbelievably impressive.
Oliver, it's an absolute privilege to have you on Beyond the Pitch, one of the best journalists that England has to offer. You wrote a really interesting piece the other day about Paris Saint-Germain and their lack of utilization of Parisian players. You look at the amount of players that have come through that area, it is absolutely mind-boggling. But apart from Kylian Mbappe, you can't think of too many players from that region who've really become stars. It seems that PSG are getting further and further away from reaching their goals of winning their first ever European Cup. There's questions, is this going to be Lionel Messi and Neymar's final season at the Parc des Princes? Where do PSG go from here? And how are they going to be able to incorporate these academy players whilst also dealing with stars? Or do you feel like they're going to perhaps be moving away from that Galactico kind of model?
Yeah, there's been a few mentions the past few days about maybe challenges with FFP. Now, personally, I can't imagine that that PSG are going to be vulnerable in that respect at all, given the influence that they seem to have now within the ECA and therefore within UEFA. I can't imagine that's a threat, but it does feel like the whole Qatari project at PSG has reached another stage entirely, and I think they have to realise that that what I don't like is when people say that they've been useless in the Champions League for 10 years. That's not true. They were really good, a real force in the Champions League for a good chunk of the past decade. they would lose matches narrowly, and sometimes sort of spectacularly, sometimes comically. If you know, no offense to anyone who's a PSG fan, but they would have these sort of meltdowns from what looked like, really good, strong positions against strong teams in the quarterfinal or something like that. They reached a final a couple of years ago. They reached semi-finals. They've always, for most of the past decade, they've been really good. One of the top probably 5 teams in Europe. And you look at the last couple of years, and they just haven't been. They looked good until they imploded against Real Madrid last season. But the last 3 years, they've not been so dominant in France. They've not been such a force in the Champions League. And I think they just have to look at it and say, we got carried away by thinking Neymar plus Mbappe plus Messi plus Ramos plus Donnarumma plus Wijnaldum, Herrera, all these sort of big name players that they were signing. It just hasn't worked. And they've had, as I said, in the article, they've had so much top class talent on their doorstep. Obviously, they've got Kimpembe, Mbappe in the team, but they've it's been a real opportunity wasted. When you look at, I'm just looking at a list now: Areola, Koundé, Konate, Saliba, Fofana, Disasi, Guendouzi, Rabiot, Koulibaly, Coman, and Mbappe. They're all in France's squad in the World Cup. You've got all these other players like Diaby, who are extremely talented players who are just, who are excelling elsewhere away from Paris. And at a time when PSG are looking for local talent and trying to build a sort of more Parisian what's the word, flashy bling bling sort of identity. It's just a real waste that they've, some of those players have been in their academy, Coman most obviously. Some of them have been at other clubs in France. Some of them have been, at Leipzig or Salzburg or wherever, and they're all just playing elsewhere. Some of them have had 2 or 3 moves, like Ibrahima Konate, and PSG have just been nowhere. And now they're looking at building with players from their own academy, which sounds great, Zaire Emery and Bichabou, etc. But it's so much harder when they're looking at 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds to suddenly take over from Ramos and potentially take over from Messi and Neymar. And it's the lack of vision there, the lack of a football vision there is frustrating, because no club in Europe has had a better opportunity to build around youth and homegrown talent the last 10 years. And they're almost back to square one.
On that topic, Ollie, with really the Qataris, because it brings up another point. Whenever you try to do this shortcut success Galactico project, you see this at Chelsea, you see this at City, where they have exceptional academies but have a hard time getting those kids into the first team. We talked about this on the podcast on Friday, where PSG lost to a club like Bayern Munich, who do have a history and a culture of bringing through young players. And then you see the potential takeover of Manchester United with Qatar, a football club that has deep history and tradition with bringing through young players. Is it perhaps a warning sign now for clubs like United, in the sense that the club wouldn't be run commensurate with this culture?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, for one thing, Manchester United are not going to have the depth of talent that was available to PSG or available to a club in Paris over the last 10 years. But you look at a decade in which Foden has come through it in Man City, and Rashford has come through at Man United, and that's really good by today's standards for a big English city like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, wherever. It's hard to do what I'm criticising PSG for not doing, but United are a club whose their identity is built around that, and people could dismiss that because there haven't been too many the past sort of couple of decades, but it's a really important part of the Manchester United story, Busby Babes and Class of '92 and all of that, and it should remain so. And I would worry that, look, I think there are bigger reasons to worry about Qatari ownership of Manchester United, and not everyone would agree with me on that, but I think there's an identity issue. I think there's an integrity issue, an ethical issue. But yeah, in terms of the youth side, and would Qatar just want superstars, statement signings of the type that United, to be honest, have made over the past 10 years? That's what they've probably done too much of. They've never had a playing identity the last 10 years, until now, perhaps. And yeah, I wouldn't be, if I was a United fan, I wouldn't be incredibly excited about the idea of Qatar. I think I would have reservations about sort of reputational things, about integrity, ethics, and I would have concerns looking at what they've done at PSG, frankly.
Oliver,
although of course, the two.
Go ahead, Oliver.
Although of course, this sheikh would be completely separate from. But yes, or whatever.
Go ahead, Zach.
Oliver, we've talked a lot about sports washing on the show. I know that it's something that you've mentioned a lot in your work, but I think that it's something that isn't new, right? We've seen this with Chelsea and Russia, Manchester City and the United Arab Emirates. I'm curious, though, if this Qatari takeover is to materialize, how is it that we are going to see Qatar controlling two giants of world football in Manchester United and Paris Saint-Germain? One team that has been, shall we say, nouveau riche, that are still trying to find that European Cup. Manchester United, on the other hand, are kind of on the precipice of a rehabilitation, a renaissance, shall we say. How is it that one country are going to be able to have two super teams, and for those two teams to coexist with one another?
Well, I referred earlier to the power and influence that PSG have gained within the ECA and therefore within UEFA. Manchester United are a club who, are powerful and influential in those circles. And look, Qatar have made major investments in Barcelona and Bayern Munich over the last few years. There's an influence there, whether people like to acknowledge it or not, and they will just state if this is being presented as a bid by an individual.
I think I lost you there, Ollie.
Sports investments, it's being framed as a completely an independent venture, and if it's the bid that's accepted, I've absolutely no doubt it will go through to the satisfaction of UEFA and whoever else, because this is they are satisfied that there's no sort of common or shared interest between, for example, RB Leipzig. Let's be honest, Red Bull Leipzig, and Red Bull Salzburg. That the degree of separation is, you should have. Well, to my mind, clubs should be completely independent of each other. I don't like the idea of feeder clubs, nursery clubs, strategic partnerships, any of it. I like the idea of every club being sovereign and being independent of each other for competitive reasons, for ethical reasons, for just institutional, cultural reasons. And the suggestion that Manchester United and PSG would be linked is offensive, basically. But I'm sure they'll just say no. It's just two Qatari. It's just two separate Qatari entities, and then that will free another Qatari entity to buy an Italian club, maybe Juventus, maybe AC Milan. Who knows? But I don't see any of it as healthy, and it's not an anti-Qatar thing. I have a very old-fashioned view on what a club should be and how independent it should be from sort of outside influence.
Well, I know you're short on time. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll ask one more and I'll throw it back to Zach. He can take you out. Does England have a VAR problem? Is it a situation where the rules are now so nuanced that it is ridiculous and it's impossible to expect consistency? We see such major inconsistencies from game to game between similar decisions. Do we have a VAR problem in England?
It's just probably an extension of the previous refereeing problem in that standards will never be as good as people want them to be. And I think to be honest, with refereeing, with VAR in the Premier League, I'm a bit more sympathetic towards the referees than a lot of people are. I think there are some pretty awful decisions at times. There are some decisions I don't understand, but that's, I don't know, so much of it is subjective and so much of it's fast paced and so few decisions are, completely black and white and really 100% obvious. And you've got players rolling around and making life even harder for the referees and playing for things that they shouldn't play for. I think it's just impossible unless everyone wants everything to be completely like make everything black and white, which would probably mean it becoming a complete non-contact sport, which I don't want. Or for these, what do we call it, semi-automated offsides, where if you're a fingernail's width ahead of somebody, you're offside, and I don't want that either. I like the degree of subjectivity, but I can understand it drives people mad, and I think the rules don't really help, and I think the constant tweaking with the offside rule doesn't help at all. So I'm not a big fan of VAR. I can deal with and accept wrong decisions with referees. I can deal with and accept wrong decisions with VAR, even though it's more frustrating.
Go ahead, Zach. We've got one quick question left. We've got to go. Let Ollie go.
Absolutely. Oliver, thank you so much for your time. It seems like we are really witnessing a rebirth for Manchester United under Erik ten Hag, but we're also seeing perhaps the light at the end of the tunnel with regards to the Glazers' ownership. I'm curious, how do you think United has changed under the Glazers' ownership, and how do you feel history will remember them as owners?
Negligent owners. Uncaring owners who sort of bought the club with its own money largely with its own money and walked away with a multi-billion dollar profit. Incredible piece of business if you can do it, but I think it's horrendous what they've done with the club. You'll get fans of rival clubs saying, "Oh, look, they spent £1 billion. It's not their fault. It's the managers, and it's the." They've never had any interest in getting the football side of it right. They've never the underperformance in the football side of it over the last 10 years is of a level they simply would not have accepted if it was the commercial side underperforming like that. And to be honest, the commercial side has ended up flatlining because the football side has flatlined. They're making less in sponsorship. You see other clubs have grown and grown and grown over that period. United have stagnated even commercially in the end. I think they've been useless owners and uncaring owners, and if you had to do that with one club and sort of pay for the acquisition with the club's own money and have the club paying interest and so on, I think it's totally unethical to do that with a football club as opposed to an ordinary business. But I think Man United are almost the only club that could have handled that level of abuse, frankly, and still remained, nowhere near the level they were, but they've survived financially, and they've, as a business, it's still fine. But I just think, it's underinvestment, not caring a bit about the football side until it affects the revenue. I think they will be remembered not as the kind of complete corporate vandals that we've seen at some clubs, but they will be remembered with, I think, a large degree of disdain. I don't think it's really dawned on a lot of people just how much money they're going to walk away with, and I think they deserve to walk away with nothing, frankly, because it wasn't their money they were investing. It wasn't their money they were taking risks with. They brought no expertise to the table. Fair play if you can get away with it, but I don't think you should be able to, frankly. And what might happen is that they end up just accepting a minority investment from someone, and they stay on.
Don't scare me, Ollie.
No, it might well happen. It might well happen, and and so there's that, or they might just go with the biggest bid and absolutely not care about what comes next, because they've not cared for the last 18 years. So why would they care what happens in the next 18?
Ollie, thanks very much for taking the time to do this. I know you're short on time. I really appreciate it, mate. Let's not leave it too long before I get you back. Thanks very much, pal.
A real pleasure. All right,
Cheers,
speak
mate.
soon.
See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.